Pay attention to this. November 7th, 2024, early morning in Detroit, Michigan. What you're about to see is 12 seconds of brutality that would initially appear to be a random attack until investigators uncovered a connection that had been buried for 4 decades. The footage shows the entrance to a small neighborhood store. A woman exits. She's elderly, moving slowly. Seconds later, a man emerges behind her. He strikes her in the head with force. She collapses immediately. The man walks away without taking anything from her. No purse is grabbed, no pockets are searched, just the strike. And then he leaves. That elderly woman was Margaret Holloway, 76, a retired social worker who'd lived in Detroit her entire life. The man was identified within hours as Darnell Price, 28, who lived 3 miles from where the attack occurred. Margaret Holloway died from her injuries 2 days later without regaining consciousness. What appeared to be a senseless act of violence was about to reveal a story 42 years in the making. When Detroit police reviewed the security footage, the attack made no sense. Price had struck Holloway and immediately walked away. He hadn't robbed her, hadn't taken her wallet or purse, hadn't even checked if she had anything valuable. He'd simply hit her and left. That wasn't typical robbery behavior. Robberies involved taking something. This was just violence. Police identified Price from the footage. His face was clearly visible. They located him at his apartment that same evening. When officers knocked, Price answered the door, seemed to know why they were there, and didn't resist arrest. During initial questioning, Price said nothing, refused to explain why he'd attacked Holloway, refused to say if he'd known her, just sat in silence while detectives showed him the footage, told him Holloway was in critical condition, asked him what had happened. Price's only response? She knows what she did. Detectives ran background checks on both Price and Holloway, looking for any connection between them. Price had a minor criminal record, a drug possession charge from 5 years earlier, nothing violent. Holloway had been a social worker for the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services for 40 years before retiring in 2010. She'd worked primarily in child protective services. That detail caught investigators' attention. Child protective services. Price's cryptic statement, "She knows what she did." Was there a connection? They pulled Holloway's employment records, found case files going back decades. And buried in files from 1982, they found it. Holloway had been the caseworker who removed a 4-year-old boy from his mother's home following reports of severe neglect. That child was Marcus Price, Darnell Price's father. The story that emerged was complicated and tragic. In 1982, Marcus Price was living with his mother, Sharon Price, in Detroit. Sharon was young, struggling, had limited support and fewer resources. Neighbors reported that 4-year-old Marcus was often left alone, sometimes for days. The house was in poor condition. There were signs of neglect. Margaret Holloway was assigned to investigate. She visited the home multiple times, interviewed Sharon, assessed the situation. Her conclusion? Marcus was at risk. Sharon was unable to provide adequate care. Marcus needed to be removed from the home. The decision was documented in Holloway's case notes. She'd written that Sharon Price was overwhelmed and incapable of providing basic needs, and that Marcus would be better served in foster care where structure and stability could be provided. Marcus was placed in the foster system. Sharon fought to get him back, attended parenting classes, tried to meet the requirements, but she never regained custody. Marcus grew up in multiple foster homes, aged out of the system at 18, and struggled with his identity and sense of belonging for years afterward. Marcus Price had his son Darnell in 1996 when Marcus was 18 years old. Marcus told his son Darnell about his childhood, about being taken away from his mother, about the social worker who'd made that decision, about how his life might have been different if he'd been allowed to stay with family. Darnell grew up hearing these stories, hearing his father's pain, hearing about the woman who, destroyed our family. Sharon Price, Darnell's grandmother, had died 10 years earlier. Marcus Price, Darnell's father, had died 3 years ago from complications related to substance abuse, a struggle Marcus had battled since his teenage years, something he'd attributed to the trauma of being removed from his mother. Darnell blamed Margaret Holloway for all of it. His father's struggles, his grandmother's heartbreak, the fracture in his family that had never healed. In September 2024, 2 months before the attack, Darnell had found old documents in his father's belongings, case files, court records, letters. In those documents was Margaret Holloway's name, her signature on reports, her assessments of why Marcus needed to be removed. Darnell became obsessed. He researched Holloway, found where she lived, learned her routines. He discovered she shopped at a small neighborhood store every Tuesday morning, walked there from her house 6 blocks away. On November 7th, Darnell went to that store. He waited. When Holloway emerged, he followed her out and attacked her. The blow to her head was meant to kill, and 2 days later, it did. During interrogation after Holloway's death, Darnell confessed everything. He explained the connection between his father and Holloway. He said he'd been planning the attack for weeks. He showed no remorse. "She took my father away from his mother," Darnell told detectives. "She put him in a system that broke him. He spent his whole life damaged because of what she did. She deserved what happened." Detectives explained to Darnell that social workers make difficult decisions based on the information available, that removing children from homes is done to protect them, not to punish families. Darnell didn't accept that. "My father needed his mother. She needed him. That woman decided they couldn't be together. She destroyed my family. I made her pay for it." The case raised difficult questions about the child welfare system and the long-term impacts of decisions made by social workers. Margaret Holloway had been doing her job in 1982. She'd seen a child in a situation she believed was harmful. She'd followed protocol. She'd made the decision she thought was right. But Marcus Price had lived his entire life feeling abandoned and displaced. He'd struggled with identity, with addiction, with the trauma of losing his mother and never feeling he belonged anywhere. He'd passed that pain to his son. And 42 years later, Darnell Price had decided someone needed to be held accountable. Prosecutors charged Darnell with first-degree murder. The case went to trial in March 2025. The prosecution presented the security footage, Darnell's confession, evidence of premeditation. They argued this was calculated revenge, not a crime of passion. The defense didn't dispute that Darnell had killed Holloway. Instead, they presented the history. Marcus's removal from his home, his struggles, his death. They argued that Darnell had been driven by generational trauma, that he'd been trying to avenge what he saw as an injustice done to his family. The jury convicted Darnell of second-degree murder, finding that, while the killing was intentional, it had been motivated by extreme emotional disturbance related to his father's history. He was sentenced to 35 years to life. At sentencing, Margaret Holloway's daughter gave a victim impact statement. She described her mother as a woman who dedicated her life to protecting vulnerable children who'd made difficult decisions because she believed in doing what was right, even when it was hard. "My mother removed children from homes because she believed they were in danger. She didn't do it to hurt families. She did it because she cared about those children's safety. And 4 decades later, she was killed because someone decided that decision made her a monster. She died for doing her job." Darnell was given the opportunity to speak. He said only, "My father died broken. That was because of her. I did what I had to do." The case sparked debate about whether social workers should face consequences when their decisions have negative long-term impacts on the families involved. Some argued that Holloway had made a mistake in removing Marcus from his mother, that families like Sharon Price's need support, not separation. Others argued that Holloway had done exactly what she was supposed to do, based on the information she had in 1982. Child welfare experts noted that hindsight makes every decision look different. In 1982, Margaret Holloway saw a 4-year-old child who was being left alone for extended periods. She saw a mother who was overwhelmed and struggling. She made the decision she believed would keep that child safe. That Marcus's life didn't improve in foster care, that he struggled as an adult, that he passed trauma to his son. Those outcomes couldn't have been predicted. And they didn't necessarily mean the decision to remove him had been wrong at the time. But Darnell Price saw it differently. To him, Margaret Holloway had destroyed his family, and he'd spent months planning to make her pay for it. The security footage from November 7th has been used in training for social workers across Michigan. It serves as a grim reminder that the decisions made in child welfare work have ripples that extend far beyond the immediate case. 42 years after removing a child from a home, the social worker who made that decision was killed by that child's son. Margaret Holloway is buried in Detroit. Her family has requested that her grave location remain private after someone vandalized it months after her death, spray painting "Child Thief" on the headstone. Darnell Price is incarcerated at a Michigan state prison. He's maintained that he has no regrets, that Margaret Holloway got what she deserved for taking his father from his grandmother. Marcus Price never had the chance to reconcile with the decision made about him in 1982. He died, believing he'd been wrongly taken from his mother, that his life had been ruined by a social worker who didn't care about keeping families together. And Sharon Price, who lost custody of her son in 1982, died in 2014, never having fully reconnected with Marcus, carrying the grief of separation for 32 years. 3 lives destroyed by poverty, systemic failure, and decisions made with incomplete information. 1 woman dead because a young man decided someone needed to be blamed for his family's pain. And a security camera that captured 12 seconds of violence rooted in 42 years of unhealed trauma. The hardest decisions are often made by people trying to protect the vulnerable. And sometimes those decisions haunt everyone involved for decades. Subscribe for true crime stories that explore the complex motivations behind violent acts. Click on the suggested videos to see more cases where the past caught up with the present. And remember, every decision we make has consequences we may never see.